everyone, and welcome to Habitat for Humanity's 3D printed homes, new trend or lasting solution. I'm Miriam Axel-Lute, CEO and editor-in-chief of Shelterforce, a national publication for people working in community development and on housing justice. I'm pleased to be with you today to explore the rise in 3D printed homes and the challenges this new technology faces in various markets and resource settings around the world. From Virginia to India, there's no denying that 3D printing technology is making a splash in the construction sector, the development community, and among the public more broadly. This is a discussion that will kick off a series on innovations in housing, where experts will gather periodically to examine alternative construction materials, sustainable solutions, and outside-the-box approaches around the world. And now I'd like to turn first to a short video that shows a 3D printed home throughout construction and to completion. And this is the first 3D printed home produced by Habitat for Humanity in the United States. Great. And now I'd like to turn to our esteemed panel. Thank you all for being here today. Ryan Coker is the Vice President of Innovation at International Code Council, the leading global source of building standards and safety solutions. In this capacity, he works to identify emerging issues in the building industry, including how new technologies can be leveraged by codes and standards and methods to modernize the application of building regulations. Janet V. Green is the CEO of Habitat for Humanity Peninsula and Greater Williamsburg in Virginia. Since its founding in 1985, this organization has built, renovated, and repaired more than 500 homes. Janet came to Habitat in 2002, following 20-plus years in Washington, D.C. And Aditya Jain is co-founder and CEO of the startup Tavasta Manufacturing Solutions, which develops 3D printed solutions in construction, from 3D printed houses to toilets and other structures. In 2018, Tavasta won Best Startup of the Year in Construction from Construction Industry Development Council and Best Startup of the Year award from the Technology Development Board. Welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us. And thanks as well to our audience today. Just a note, the panel will be taking questions directly from the audience later in the hour, so please drop your comments and questions in the chat box as we go. So, Janet, we'd like to start with you. we just saw a peek inside the construction process for Habitat for Humanity Peninsula and Greater Williamsburg's 3D printed home. Now, when most people in the US think about Habitat, we typically think about volunteer-led builds using more traditional methods. So can you tell us what attracted your affiliate to this new building approach and how, based on your experience of doing it, it might fit into the future of both Habitat's work and home construction in general?
Well, thank you, and I hope you all enjoyed the video. I have seen it countless times, and it still gives me goosebumps. I like to think of 3D printing habitat homes as a new tool in our toolbox. So we still did use volunteers on this home after the 3D portion of the exterior of the home was printed. We did the interior similar to most habitat stick build homes. So we did have volunteers, and it is just a exciting new time to try to figure out this new technology. 3D printed homes are more energy efficient. They are also temperature and better for heating and cooling costs. So that will be great for our longtime homeowners. Concrete is more resistant to tornado damage and hurricane, and concrete doesn't burn. So whether you're in Arizona, where they also just finished their 3D house and it's awfully hot there, or in Virginia or in India, I think this new technology can really be transformational for both Habitat and other nonprofit and for-profit developers.
Great. Thank you, Janet. And so as you mentioned, 3D printing is gaining traction not just in the US, but around the world. So I want to turn to Aditya next. You co-founded Tavasta while you were in university, and it's the first startup in India to focus on 3D printed homes. Can you tell us a little bit more about the technology and what makes it a good fit for tackling affordable housing in India?
Absolutely. So I started this company along with my team, my co-founders, about 5 years back. And what attracted us towards 3D printing was that it is a completely digitized method of construction. And we could use this to tailor make structures for individuals. In India and elsewhere, a house is the biggest asset that a person invests in their lifetime. And in almost all cases, they want it customized, they want it tailor-made for their requirements. And this is extremely important to them with respect to their, daily life and also with respect to their ambitions. And hence, with 3D printing, which basically involves um, a digital method of construction where we have a 3D printer which deposits materials in a particular shape and form that the user requires, we can provide this customization without sacrificing productivity to the end customer. And this can really be a game changer in India's construction industry, where almost 90% of home ownership or home construction is directly led by the individual hiring a small contractor to build their house. And what happens in these cases is that there is very minimal modern technology based intervention that actually is used. It's conventional construction, which has been practiced for the last 50 to 60 years, that is currently being used in this particular space. And this is not, productive on the ground. There are a lot of inefficiencies, and 3D printing can really change that. And another aspect is we are with 3D printing, we are able to pass on the benefits of economies of scale to the end customer without sacrificing productivity, and that can be a game changer in India.
Great. Thank you, Aditya. I wanted to follow up on that. So we've heard from you and Janet about some of the benefits, but we know this is a fairly new technology. And so can you tell me at the moment, what are some of the biggest limitations of the technology, and do you think they can be addressed?
Absolutely. I think 3D printing has multiple, it's not a a technology that's a monolith. It has multiple elements to it. You have the 3D printer itself, which is the machine. You have the material or the concrete, which is extremely important. And this is a specialized form of concrete that we use for 3D printing. It's very similar to conventional concrete, has all the properties of it, but you require it in a specific form. And you have a software that manages the 3D printing process. And you have to, of course, marry this technology with conventional civil engineering. So all of these aspects have to come together for 3D printing to really work on the ground, and scaling it up with all of these various elements working in cohesion is a very big task. So I would say logistics is a major constraint with respect to scaling up 3D printing at this point of time. Another aspect is execution capacity of any organization which is doing this, because you require a fair bit of training to be adept at 3D printing technology and really executing things on the ground. Another key aspect in certain geographies could be customer acceptability. We have seen in India that customers are really keen to adapt 3D printing, in fact, because people see that it is similar to a conventional house made out of concrete, which is a very familiar material to house owners in India. So there is a fair bit of positivity towards 3D printing in this country, but that might not be the case elsewhere. So these might be a few factors that might hold up the advance of 3D printing.
Got it. Thank you. So moving to Ryan, we place a lot of trust in our homes and our other infrastructure to keep us safe and secure, and we have that confidence in part because of material and construction standards that guide the sector. Ryan, what considerations do regulators weigh when it comes to standards for new technologies like 3D printing? How do you look to find a balance between promoting innovation and still preserving that building safety and quality?
Yeah, and thanks for the question and the opportunity to participate today. At the end of the day, regulations and standards are really intended to provide a uniform level of safety, sustainability, and resilience for, building occupants, building owners. And so really what, the regulatory community is looking for is, new technologies to meet, similar levels of requirements. And so, with new technologies, there are certainly questions on whether they can meet the resilience and sustainability, efficiency, and safety goals. And so really it's about sort of testing those products, having the opportunity to sort of see them in the field, make sure that they do meet those specific requirements around safety and sustainability. And so there are tools within the regulatory landscape to be able to accomplish that. So there are things like product evaluation, which really go through that testing process and provide some level of assurance to folks on the ground that the materials and technologies being used do meet those requirements. And so sort of figuring out that balance is essential. But having new innovations and new practices in the industry is really what's going to help drive meeting the sustainability, resilience goals that folks may have.
Great. And Ryan, we have a follow-up just for you from the audience. For ICC, what building classification type does 3D printing construction fall under?
Yeah, so 3D printing is at this point primarily used in the residential space. We do have an acceptance criteria for use in multifamily as well. So there's criteria within the International Residential Code for how to use 3D printed technologies, and then we also have a product evaluation for the cement printing material, and so really providing some level of assurance that material provides similar qualities to what you would expect from other forms of building enclosures.
Great. Thank you. I wanted to follow up with Janet, because something Aditya mentioned about acceptance and reaction in the community. So Janet, when your team introduced the idea of a 3D printed home, what was the reaction from your local community broadly and the family that moved in?
Let's start with the reaction of our construction crew.
That's important too.
They were just as flummoxed as everyone else about what this means. Our longtime volunteers were also curious. But I think that we all were very open to what this might mean, and mostly, can we provide more affordable housing for these families with low to moderate incomes? Can we do it cheaper? Can we do it faster? Can we scale? And so, from the community's perspective, I think they were curious. I want to urge people who are thinking of this, as always, as Ryan just said, work with your permitting and codes, because they're the key to making this all work. As far as our homeowner, she was actually picked a full year ago, as so many Habitat families do when they have to work on their financial literacy and their education classes and their sweat equity. So when it came time that she was matched, she didn't understand this either, but she states very proudly that she grew up in her grandparents' home that had concrete, and she thought it was cold. And that was one of her biggest concerns, was, would this be cold? And we are so proud that she got to watch it from the very beginning to the end, as most of the Habitat homeowners do when they're working on their sweat equity, and could help make some of those changes that would make her happier with the actual completed project of her Habitat home.
Great, thank you. And so, Janet, you mentioned cost, and the promise that many people talk about with alternative construction methods is that they will be more affordable, as we're struggling with housing cost around the world. And at Shelterforce, we did a special series last fall called Building Differently. And when we spoke to various nonprofit developers who were experimenting or looking into these different methods, for the most part, for them, the cost savings weren't quite there yet. It was too new. So what did you achieve any savings, and more importantly, what will it take from your experience in terms of infrastructure and critical mass to realize the projected cost savings, and how large might they be?
Good question. And we did not realize any cost savings, but that was due to that this was brand new technology, and being the first Habitat completed 3D printed home in the nation, we had a lot of stops and starts. When we finally started the actual printing, it was August here in Virginia, and it got to be over 100 degrees, which is nothing compared to Phoenix, Arizona. But the concrete and humidity did not like each other. They were not compatible. We did a lot of testing and a lot of prototypes, which cost money. And we were very fortunate to have a lot of wonderful sponsors and donors and interested parties, but it was not cheaper. It was faster if we could have kept printing continuously. So it took us about 28 hours to print the 156 layers of concrete that you saw there from the video. Had we been able to do more than one house, I think the cost savings would have been substantial. And that's where we're hoping that this new technology, as we move forward, can be printing more and more houses. It should be cheaper, cost less, be safer, and we look forward to those improvements in the future.
Aditi, I'd like you to get to weigh in too on this question of cost savings from your experience.
Absolutely. So 3D printing is a completely new technology in the market, and it is being experimented currently in the, I would say, pilot scale in various geographies. So when we do bring in a new technology, there is training required. There is a lot of testing required. You need demonstration to be done to customers in some cases. So all these things do add to the cost. So cost savings will only be realized over a period of time. I think this is the case scenario for any new technology that comes into market. And construction is a very capital intensive industry, and hence it would take a bit of time. But as Janet said, I think we would be able to see cost savings when we construct multiple structures in parallel in the country. And I think with a little bit of scale, we will be able to pass on a real cost savings to the final customers, irrespective of geography and irrespective of the types of structures that we are doing. So I think that minimum bit of scale is absolutely necessary, and that's something that 3D printing is just getting to.
Right. Thank you. And so we've also heard a fair amount about the concrete and some of the benefits of using concrete and this special blend. But can you talk a little bit about the environmental impact of concrete more broadly and the sustainability of this technology? Because we know that sustainability and environmental impact are not just in the energy efficiency of the home that you've created, but the effects of the materials that you're using and all the energy going into construction and maintenance and for the life cycle of the home. So how are you thinking about that? I'm going to start with Aditya, but anyone else can jump in to talk about the materials.
Sure, absolutely. I think you raised a very pertinent point. So there are two aspects to sustainability. There is the energy consumed by the structure during its lifetime, and you also have to look at the construction process and how much energy and carbon footprint is generated by these processes. Concrete is certainly not the ideal material for us in the long term, since it is not extremely sustainable from that perspective. We are looking at alternative materials such as geopolymers, which can have a negative carbon effect, where we will be using industrial waste and other materials for the construction process. So when we transition to this 3D printing as a process, will become more sustainable, but currently concrete is the most stable material that we can use, and hence we are going with it. 3D printing at this point of time can contribute significantly in terms of reduction in energy use over the lifetime of the building. So from that perspective, it can be significantly better than a conventional structure and can contribute positively towards sustainability. But in terms of construction process, I think the technology has quite a lot of, distance to go. Alternative materials is certainly one aspect. The second aspect will be localization of the 3D printing process. You do not want materials to be transported hundreds of miles to be made available for 3D printing. That contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. You also do not want the 3D printer itself to be moved across long distances. That also can be unsustainable in the long run. So these are aspects that have to be looked at. And when the technology scales up to a little a larger degree, I think these issues will start getting addressed.
I think
that makes a lot of sense.
One other thing I would add is, with the 3D printing process, you have less waste on the job site. Every piece of material that goes through the printer, has a dedicated purpose. Whereas, in many job sites, we see, dumpsters filled of, waste materials. And so, I think looking at, 3D printing and other offsite construction solutions, you can really address some of the construction waste issue as well.
That's a good additional point. Ryan, and also while we're on your perspective on this, from the ICC's perspective, is there anything that you can do that how regulations can support and encourage moving toward sustainability or sustainable applications of technology?
Yeah, so we actually have a lot of activities in the work currently. One is certainly looking at our International Energy Conservation Code, which regulates the energy use within buildings. We saw from the 2018 edition to the 2021 edition a 9.4% improvement in energy savings and about an 8.5% improvement in greenhouse gas reductions. So that's certainly looking at the operational side. Looking at the embodied carbon in the construction process and the materials used, we're actually getting underway a standard development process to look at how do we provide a consistent basis for the measurement and verification of carbon across the entire life cycle of a building. So when we talk about say the concrete that's used in 3D printing, the material itself may have a larger level of carbon in that process. But as both of our other speakers mentioned, there are energy efficiency improvements that come along with that as well. And so how do you sort of figure out the balance between those two and find sort of the ideal strategy to address the really greenhouse gas reduction goals that folks may have?
That sounds
And
like
I'd
a
like
challenging. Go ahead, Janet.
Thanks. We partnered with Virginia Tech Center for Housing Research on this home, and they have installed, it was called Raspberry Pi, now it's called Building Data Lite Monitoring System. And this is a scalable system that is in the home right now that is collecting data through sensors. They're about the size of a credit card, and there are 6 of them through the house. And it's going to do everything from tracking and maintaining the indoor environment and air quality, temperature, humidity, flames, gases, and it is sending this information every day. The homeowner doesn't have to do anything to Virginia Tech Center for Housing Research. So we can monitor this home over the life of the home and share this information with everybody on this new technology, because we want to make sure it does do what we're saying and trying to be friendlier for the environment. So we're hoping that the BDL system will help all of us improve this technology.
That sounds really helpful in figuring this out. I'd like to, you mentioned the printers themselves. DC had talked about having to move them from place to place. And one of the things that came up in our series is the size of the printer and needing a certain site layout and space around the building that you're creating in order to use the printer. Does this limit its use in infill? And are there regions or other things like the humidity that you mentioned? Are there regions or settings where 3D homes are going to work better or less? Start with Janet, but anyone can take the question.
We had a double wide lot, so that worked well, but I would call it an infill lot. But as I mentioned at the outset, I don't think one-offs, printing one 3D house at a time, is ever going to be cost effective. So if you can print multiples, I think at that point, that's where the efficiencies come in. This home was a 1-story, 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, but 3D printers already, excuse me, have changed that you can do duplexes, you can do 4 stories, you can do, it's really just the machine and the size. So I don't think it's going to be a challenge to where you're going to build. But again, it's the more you can do multiples with those cost efficiencies, because as we talked about, trailering in the printer, having the different cranes, et cetera, to move this heavy equipment, to just do one home, it is not cost effective.
Makes
Right.
sense.
Just adding a point to that, I think there are multiple possibilities with 3D printing. What was explained in the video was what we call on-site 3D printing, where the 3D printer itself goes to the final construction site and carries out construction. That is, of course, one way of doing it, and it is a very relevant way of doing it as well. But there is offsite 3D printing as well, which is used by several players across the world. We use it in India, and we feel it is a very valid technology for especially urban construction, where we 3D print modules or elements within a factory environment and then get them assembled at a construction site. This, especially in crowded urban environments, such as what we have in India, can be extremely cost effective, and we can have structures which are very customized, one-offs, done without sacrificing productivity. So I think the size of the printer need not be a constraint if we look for other types of printing systems. Offsite construction system is one where we are not limited by the size of the printer. We also have certain 3D printers which function based on robotic arms and not a large gantry system. So these are movable robotic arms which are based on, mounted on vehicles which can move around. So the size of the printer need not be a constraint ultimately.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, certainly in the offsite construction space, we're also seeing an increase in 3D printing in factories, not just with cement-based materials, but also metal-based materials. And so you can develop full volumetric modules, put them on the back of a truck and move it to the job site. And so using 3D printing technology in offsite applications, I think, is another area which could address some of the challenges that both our other speakers mentioned.
That's really fascinating. I had not heard of offsite and 3D printing together, although it makes so much sense. Question for Ryan. So as this is new and many local governments haven't seen it before, it seems important to engage with local governments before a 3D printing project begins. What would you say is sort of the transition strategy at the local level with people doing permitting and planning to help them understand moving from thinking about a traditional site build to 3D?
Yeah, I mean, certainly seeing, projects, like the one in Virginia is certainly a good start and sort of provides, at least some perspective on, others have done this before. But, for folks that are considering using, 3D printing, as Janet mentioned, I think your first stop is probably, your local building department. Talk to them, understand sort of what their initial concerns are. And they should really be, partners throughout the entire process. So, that's certainly essential, when you're talking about, a new project. Sort of overall, within the, code official world, education and training is certainly key. Looking at things like, the appendix within the International Residential Code is a really good start. But really having, things like, product evaluations, which, folks are familiar with, that really provide the basis for use of new materials and technologies is essential. But really having that education and training, access to particular projects and I saw within the video multiple different folks from the community being able to sort of walk through the house once it was completed. So those sorts of things are really important. We'll continue to see, evolutions within the context of the codes that as well will help, really help advance, these types of technologies.
That's great. Janet and Aditya, how did you work with local and even regional or national governments as relevant when you were developing your projects? And let me start with Janet.
We started right away. When we were first approached about this, the initial call actually came from James City County, which is where Williamsburg is located. And that was the very first phone call to permitting and codes to make sure, because we had heard from the Arizona experience that is what has taken the longest period of time. So we were true partners with them to work to make sure that this would all be done according to codes, according to permitting, and to make sure we could answer as many questions as we possibly could.
We started working primarily with the local government to get our plans approved and to get kickstarted on the construction activity. We, of course, had to work with structural engineers to ensure that the structure that we are designing is safe. And this was one of the first structures to be constructed in the country using 3D printing. And hence, there was a lot of education that we had to sort of impart to structural engineers who had not seen this process before. So they, of course, come from a safety first perspective. So there was a lot of convincing that we had to do. But apart from that, the central government has been extremely supportive of the technology and the initiative that we have taken. And the government of India has a special path for approving new technologies in the country. Since the codifying process usually takes a longer period of time, they enable a different path so that technology-led processes can get into the market quicker. We are part of that process and they have been extremely supportive. So they ensure that certain protocols are followed during the construction process so that safety is maintained, but at the same time, a certain level of understanding is imparted to structural engineers and other consultants who have to work with this technology to ensure that the technology gets into the market quickly. So the governments have been extremely supportive in this case, but we have to sort of work with them very closely to make it happen.
Great. So we have a lot of great questions from the audience. We want to make sure to make time for them. So we're going to jump in now. And the first one, which is a big question that comes up, we devoted one of our articles in our series to this question, is housing construction generates a lot of jobs in the US and around the world. And to some extent, sometimes the cost savings of these alternative construction methods is because they require less labor. So how are you, first, just sort of grappling with that question? And second, how are you incorporating local employment into these projects? What kind of skilled labor and training do the projects require?
I'll go first. I'm a member of the Virginia Association of Home Builders, and that was the very first questions that we got. Aren't you taking away jobs? This was happening also during the pandemic, and everybody I know is struggling with finding employees. We didn't want to take away any jobs, and especially with Habitat when we use a lot of volunteers, but we still needed all of the licensed subs, so HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and we still had all of those subs in there. We are also now working with the local community colleges on developing a 3D printed class curriculum, because a lot of younger people don't want to go into the construction trades, but they are very good with technology and computers. So we think that trying to marry these two is that we need more people to want to be involved in the construction trades and teaching them the skills with 3D. So we're coming up, like I mentioned, with a curriculum with the local colleges to try to teach students this new technology. But we are not trying to take away any labor. And I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future with 3D technologies.
Yeah, just building off of what Janet said, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, across the country, at least in the U.S., is that the availability of construction labor is severely limited. And so, looking at opportunities to address those labor shortages, through things like 3D printing and offsite construction is, certainly, a viable strategy. And I think, really sort of building off the coolness of the technology, and attracting new folks into the workforce, maybe folks that haven't traditionally thought of construction as a viable career. Things like 3D printing, building information modeling, and some of the software tools that are used to support it, I think it's really exciting.
Absolutely.
Aditya,
So
would you like
I'll just
to?
add. Yeah, sure. So I think, especially in India, you have so much construction currently going on that the opportunity for building new structures is almost unlimited. The amount of migration that is happening from rural parts of the country to the urban part of India is so huge that you require almost 10 million houses in the next 2 to 3 year time frame for these shortages to be sort of accommodated with. And India is going to see an urban boom where we currently have 300 million people living in urban areas, becoming 600 million by 2030. And construction is a sector where we do not have enough capacity to deliver the number of houses that are required to accommodate all these people who are moving to urban areas. So I don't think it is taking away jobs. It is certainly creating a level of productivity and opportunity whereby we can provide a very essential service. So I think when looked at it from that perspective, it is an absolute, need for the country at this point of time. And also construction is a sector where labor productivity is one of the lowest compared to other manufacturing processes. So I think a technology like 3D printing with a certain level of automation would be very welcome in terms of how it can improve the productivity of the entire labor force.
Great. Now, with any new technology, one of the benchmarks for success is the potential to improve upon the norm set by existing methods. And we've heard a little bit. You guys have all mentioned something about the improved performance of 3D homes, but I think the audience would like to hear a little more, both in terms of comfort and energy efficiency and disaster resilience. Can you tell us a little bit more about how they compare to conventional homes? Let me start with Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we're looking at a new technology that, has the potential to advance energy efficiency improvements and disaster resilience. I think if, we think about, sort of concrete structures, their ability to withstand, wind and windborne debris in storms, I think is, certainly proven out. I think there's also an opportunity to think about sort of the performance or the opportunity to develop, 3D structures after a disaster event when, housing stock may become, very limited. The ability to produce, robust structures, after a disaster event could really be, an opportunity for the 3D printing sector.
Right.
I would
Absolutely.
love to
I
see
think.
it. Go on, Aditya.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, that's where I would love. Instead, when you've got these horrible earthquakes and hurricanes like what happened in Haiti, wouldn't it be wonderful instead of getting temporary shelters that are not going to last very long, to be able to go in and do 3D permanent shelters, which would last longer and be more permanent for these residents in these disaster areas? I mean, that's where I would love to see this new technology really take off.
Right, absolutely. So, in terms of alleviating, the sort of, impoverishment that comes after disasters, 3D printing can really contribute because it's a methodology of construction that can deliver rapid, structures in a rapid manner. But apart from that, 3D printing can also be very effective in delivering disaster resilient structures, especially in the case of hurricanes. We can have structures which are tailor-made or designed in such a manner that they are much more sort of resistant and also do not sort of undertake the same level of shear stress or force during a hurricane. So this has been experimented with in the eastern coast of India, not with 3D printing, but other traditional methods of construction, that is specific designs that are more resilient towards hurricanes. Unfortunately, with conventional construction practices, these kind of structures, designing them becomes very difficult. With 3D printing, it's very easy, and it is really something that we want to try out on the eastern coast of India, which is really susceptible to hurricanes. So disaster resilient construction is something that gets very little attention, but that's something that 3D printing can really contribute to.
That's great. Quick follow-up. Janet had mentioned permanent and long-lasting. So what is the estimated life of a 3D printed exterior of a home? Is it different from traditional construction?
No one really knows yet, but we're not anticipating it being any different. The homeowner, as Al Habitat affiliates know, has closed on the home and has signed a 30-year no-interest mortgage. But as I mentioned earlier, we are monitoring this. We are sharing the information to make sure that this homeowner family can live there safely and securely. And we do know her first electric bill was quite less than when she was renting from an apartment. And when the weather gets warmer here in Virginia, we are planning on installing solar panels for even more energy efficiency of this home.
I think one other thing to think about, relative to durability is, sort of with the concrete walls, you won't have susceptibility to termites or other pests. And then you also sort of don't have some of the challenges of water infiltration, which could lead to things like mold and other things. So certainly some durability benefits from that type of process.
Certainly, I think with standardization of the entire construction process, which is possible with 3D printing, we can expect better durability. But as Janet rightly said, we do not know yet. All we can do currently is accelerated testing within certain laboratories. And that gives an estimate, but not authoritative figure that we can put out in the market at this point of time. But we do not estimate it to be any less than conventional construction. And in most cases, I think we can confidently say that it will be better.
Great. So are there certain regions or settings where you expect 3D printed homes to be more or less accessible for families? And are there potential issues of access and site level constraints that you can solve with this technology? And perhaps Aditya could start on this one.
Sure, sure. So I think it really that's a very relevant question. And in India, you have areas where you have extremely crowded environments in urban settings in India where you require multi-story construction going up to 20, 30 floors for housing to be really viable. So I would say at this point of time, 3D printing has not reached a level where we can sort of cater to these requirements. We cannot, at this point of time, construct structures which are 20 or 30 stories tall. Maybe go a few floors, but not more than that. So in those urban segments, 3D printing will not be able to make a dent for a while. In semi-rural settings or semi-urban settings, I think 3D printing can really make a difference. Individual homes is where I think 3D printing can really shine at this point of time, delivering it with a certain level of quality and with a certain level of affordability. I think can be done with 3D printing quite well. So that distinction will be there in the market for a while.
That's great. And are there any weather constraints? Janet had mentioned the humidity affecting their build in August. So is there limits in terms of times of year or climates that affect the outcome?
Certainly. I think in India, the climate system is a little more, stable than what it is elsewhere. So we do not have that level of, variability in most parts of the country, but weather certainly affects the construction process. In certain extreme conditions or certain remote parts of India where the temperature goes sub-zero, concrete does face a challenge there. So certainly, 3D printing will have to sort of come up with methods to adapt itself to constructing an extreme high temperature that is 50 degrees Celsius or more kind of scenarios, and at the same time, sub-zero temperatures is something that the technology will have to adapt to. So at this point of time, there are no answers to these questions from 3D printing.
Great.
We had
oh, go ahead, Janet.
I'm sorry. I just, when you're asking where, we partnered with Alquist 3D on this, that they were founded to build more affordable housing in distressed communities, primarily rural. And so I know that that is a goal for all of us, either low income urban areas or rural areas. And so I think we are learning literally every day how this technology can be adapted and where it can be used. When we had the initial print, as I mentioned, it was 110 degrees humidity. And when we had the dedication ceremony, it was about 30 degrees. So we've had all of those extremes, and we're learning every day. But I think this technology can easily be adapted. This machine, the Cobod construction of building on demand, came from Denmark. So we are learning every day about what this technology, where this technology can best be used.
Great. And so jumping off of that, what kind of sector ecosystem does one need to make 3D printing really successful? And I'd start with Aditya maybe and add to that. Can you speak to the the support that innovators like your company need in order to continue to develop and test this technology?
Absolutely. So I think there are several things that have to come together to make a technology like 3D printing succeed in the market. So when we started, we had to work on all these aspects from scratch, which is machine building capability, material development capability, software development, marrying the entire 3D printing process with civil engineering. So these are things that we had to work on, and hence an ecosystem is absolutely necessary from a machine building perspective, logistics of materials and delivery on the ground, um, ensuring that structural engineers understand what 3D printing is all about and how to sort of approve structures for, construction on the ground. So there are several aspects that have to come together. Consultants in the construction industry play a huge role, especially in India. And I think a lot of training and handbooks have to be handed out for them to really understand what this technology is. So there is a lot of effort needed from both the regulatory side and the and companies like us who are original equipment manufacturers to sort of train other industry folks to sort of adopt this technology. But apart from that, innovators such as us require a lot of support to sort of bring this technology to the market. Government has to sort of support us from a regulatory standpoint, and that has been there in India. We also require support from incubators and accelerators, and we were lucky to have Habitat's Shelter Tech Accelerator supporting us from very early on, I think from 2017 onwards. And Habitat has also supported us with catalytic funding, and also being an investor in our company, I think has been really sort of a great experience to work with Habitat. But apart from that, we also learned a lot about customer mindset and what customers will accept and won't accept from experienced organizations like Habitat for Humanity, especially since you have constructed more than 100,000 homes across various parts of India and also Asia. You exactly know what customers require. So these kind of elements are really necessary to push innovations such as this to the market and to the next level.
And I would build off of that, of the importance of having the regulatory community involved from the very beginning, being supportive, really understanding sort of what the technology is, what it can deliver, and so having codes and standards and code officials that really embrace the technology and really sort of be supportive of its use in communities. At the end of the day, communities are looking to address a whole host of problems, and so having technologies that are approved and can really help deliver on those goals is really essential.
Great. So we're coming up toward the end here. I have a final question from the audience, which I'm hoping everybody can address pretty briefly. Where do you see this technology evolving in the future with respect to both housing and other infrastructure projects?
I'll start. We need to do everything we can to build more affordable housing. If this is, as I mentioned at the outset, if this is another tool in the toolbox, let's continue to keep building more affordable housing.
Absolutely. I think 3D printing will, I think 3D printing will be a technology that will be really sort of friendly towards individual house owners who require, safe and reliable technologies for them to have their dream homes. So I think it will really contribute towards people having good quality housing that are customized towards their needs, than having some design or technology being imposed upon them from depending on external realities. So I think 3D printing will really make a dent in the construction market moving forward and will be a scalable technology.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the disaster recovery opportunity is certainly fascinating, and one thing that we can see moving forward in the future. I think the other is taking the sort of on-site lessons learned and leveraging that technology within the offsite construction industry. And so not just applying it to maybe full builds, but thinking about sort of how do we improve housing overall.
Thank you. So as we close, I want to quickly go around the panel again with this. What is one word or phrase that comes to mind as you look to the future of 3D printed homes? Let's start with Janet.
I'd say innovation.
I'd say exciting.
I'd go with dream home.
All right. Thank you. So on behalf of Habitat for Humanity and Shelterforce and all our panelists, I want to thank all our guests for joining us today. I've enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that you have as well. So please stay tuned for more from Habitat for Humanity on subjects like this.